Hi, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Get myself set up here. There we go. Okay. All right. Say hi if you're here with me live. Can you hear me okay? Also, please let me know that because I have a sound machine on in the back because my office is loud. Yeah, just let me know that you can actually hear me before I keep going. Okay, cool. So welcome to this week's shame series. Today we are talking about shame and trauma and food. So before we get started, just a gentle invitation to make sure that you feel comfortable where you are sitting, that you have water, that if you are feeling like you need some more nutrition, that you are giving that to yourself if that feels good. Comfy position, all the things. And just setting a general content warning around this because during these shame series, we're talking about things that a lot of us feel shame around, that a lot of us feel have had past painful experiences, have had traumatic incidents around. And so sometimes while this is information that is so helpful for you to hear, it's transformative, it's permission giving, it creates self-acceptance, it creates better understanding, realizations. It also sometimes is really hard to hear. It can really not feel good in the moment to hear things that help you feel better as you move forward. And so just acknowledging that, speaking that from the beginning to just say, if you need a pause, take a pause. If you need to come back, you can just write timestamp, like hashtag timestamp in the comments, and you can come back to that space and know exactly where you stopped. And give yourself what you need. Give yourself what you need. So I really thought about this morning briefly. For those of you who know how I plan talks, I do like a very, very brief outline, and then I give myself all the room to play in between the lines there, right? So during the brief outline I was creating, I was actually like, okay, how would it feel best to talk about this? Because if you were present for the talk around money last week, which the replay is up in the group, food is very similar in that it is one of the things that we can't escape, right? It's one of the things that we can't escape. Food is required for us to live. Caloric nutrition is required for us to stay alive, right? Money is required for us to live. Food is required for us to live. And so I think that shame and trauma around things that are required for us to survive, they're different than things that we experience shame around that aren't necessarily required for our survival, right? They may be required for our thriving. They may be required for us to feel fulfilled or to feel satisfied, but they're not required for us to physically stay alive, right? And food is one of those things. And so I wanted to think about, from a shame perspective, what are some of the messages, like where do the messages come from, and how can we like group them? How can we collect them into some categories? Because I think categories are always really helpful for me. And I was thinking about this and I thought, okay, well, let's think about the shame-based messaging that we get, right, from the start. And we get food-based messaging around scarcity. We get food and shame-based messaging with food around boundaries. We get shame-based messaging and have traumatic experiences around food and love. And we have shame-based and or traumatic experiences around self-image. The self-image piece, I'm going to touch on slightly. And next week, we're actually talking about body image and shame. And so I'm going to kind of use that as the last thing we talk about to straddle moving into the next shame series conversation around body image. And I'm going to spend the majority of the time on these first three. Okay. So when we think of trauma, right? trauma oftentimes happens when we feel like we're losing something, like we have less of something, or like when we have to make a choice, an either or choice, right? We're in a dilemma. We either have to choose X or Y, and we either like X and Y, or we don't like X and Y, right? So we're choosing between two things that we want and feeling like we can't have both, or we're choosing between two things that we don't want and feeling like either way it's going to not be fun, right? Scarcity is huge when it comes to trauma and when it comes to shame, right? Because when we think about shame's evolutionary purpose, it is to help keep people connected to the community. When we experience shame, we literally hide ourselves, we contract, we look down, we divert our gaze, we avoid connecting with other humans. Shame makes us feel like we are disconnected from other humans based on how we acted, based on who we are, based on our morals and values, right? And so when we think about food and we think about scarcity, there's a couple different ways to come at this, right? From a shame perspective. If I grow up with literal scarcity around food, I have less food, or less nutritious food, or less food available to me than is really necessary for my thriving, or is almost barely necessary for my surviving, right? If there are times that I don't have enough food, or there are times that I'm having to choose between paying for food and keeping the light bill on, right? If as a parent, I'm having to choose between feeding myself enough or feeding my kids, right? If we have actual scarcity, actual painful past experiences, trauma, physical trauma around going hungry, right? From a there's not enough standpoint. This is one of those that is a experience of shame and an experience of trauma that is a little different than the rest, right? Because this is an actual physical need not being met because there's not enough. There's not enough resources, okay? I always really like to start here with people, because sometimes when I'm talking with people who say that they have issues with food, with restriction, with overeating, which isn't actually a thing, by the way, with binging, with disordered patterns of eating, when we get down to it, if there was an issue of there not being enough food, of them having to think about when the next meal was coming from, of them having to eat food that was stale or that was expired or that was, not safe in order to get nutrients, that is an entirely different experience than someone who had enough and maybe had some psychological safety threatened, right? There is a difference between having your physical safety threatened and having your psychological safety threatened. Now, they feel the same in the body, but how we actually go about releasing that shame is different, right? So when I have people come to me and say that they're preoccupied with food, or they have disordered eating around food, and we go back and we learn that, like, oh, wow, they only ate 2 meals a day because that's all that could be afforded. Or they were the kid that got made fun of for bringing home school lunches or bringing home food on the weekends that they gave to the kids who didn't have enough, right? There's some psychological shame potentially wrapped up in that too. So something to think about is, does it make sense that your brain has stayed preoccupied with food even now that you have enough? Absolutely. Because your nervous system learned to be hyper vigilant about having enough food. It learned to focus in there. It learned that that was not a stable thing that you could rely on. And so creating stability around, yes, I can make sure I am as an adult, I have the resources available to me to ensure that I always have enough food. That's going to be a fundamentally different belief and need that's instilled in, because most people already have that belief instilled. The vast majority of people already believe that there is always going to be enough food. So I want to speak to anybody who has that fundamental physical trauma piece to this. Is that's a great place to start is really working to help your nervous system, to re-regulate your nervous system around the fact that now that you are out of that scarcity mode, that's not necessarily a place, or not likely a place, that you're going to go back to, because you can be empowered to ensure that that's not where you go again. Even if it means asking for help, even if it means having to do some things that require vulnerability, even if it means doing some things that you previously attributed to as shameful, like asking for help, really learning that like that is a way that you help yourself survive and thrive. Okay. The other piece around scarcity too is if there was enough food and your access to it was restricted, right? If your parents padlocked the fridge, which I've heard those stories. If your caregivers restricted your access to any type of food, by the way. This is an interesting conversation to have in the world that we live in now, because food is more abundant than ever before. And also it's less nutritious in many cases than ever before. And a lot of the available options to us aren't necessarily the best things to fuel us. And yet when we start having conversations around what's healthy and what's not, what's bad and what's good, what's junk food and what's diet food, when we start ascribing and attributing labels to the food that we eat, and then we determine what we can or can't eat based on the category that we've placed that food in, this can start creating some a false sense that food is not available, right? Or you may have actually had it restricted as a child. Your parents may have said, you're not allowed to eat that. And especially if this was tied to body image and weight, huge, right? This is something that I experienced a lot of because, again, my parents were doing the best that they could, parenting the best that they could. This is something that we've had to really recognize with our kids is, okay, when are quote unquote treats allowed, right? When do we push fruit over letting them have a popsicle, right? How do we set them up so that they don't have a false sense of scarcity around the food that they are allowed to have, around the food that is available to them? How do we set it up so that they understand that they get to listen to their bodies and make the choices that are best for them, whether that's the popsicle or the ice cream or the bag of chips versus the banana or the smoothie or the cheese ball or the protein bar or whatever, right? But thinking about your own experience as a child, were foods put as off limits? Did you feel shame, or were you shamed around desiring to eat certain foods? Were you told that quote unquote bad things were going to happen to you, AKA you'll gain weight, AKA you won't be attractive, AKA whatever? Were you told those things? Because if so, that created a false sense of scarcity. And it also started labeling foods as good and bad, right? It took away the ability to see food as nutrition and to look at food as fuel, food as pleasure, food as a source of connection, right? And made it food as a source of shame, or food is a source of righteousness, right? If you eat these foods, you're righteous. If you eat these foods, you should experience shame. And by the way, we're talking about something that even if your caregivers did this to you, this is because of the vast majority of socialized messaging that we get on a daily basis. The diet industry, the diet industry alone is an $80 billion a year industry. I said B, not M, $1 billion a year industry. And it's expected to be even more this year, right? $80 billion a year is spent on helping you put shame on food. Isn't that fascinating? Put shame on your body, put shame on how you move your body, and shame on how you feel your body. Anybody else feeling me on that? I'm not seeing any comments. So if y'all are still here with me and hanging with me, let me know, because I see a lot of you watching. So I just want to make sure that there's nothing weird happening where I'm not seeing what is happening for you. So when I learned this, what was also super fascinating to me is, being a nurse practitioner, I actually thought that I was going to go into nutrition before choosing to go to grad school to become a nurse practitioner. And when I was in my nutrition courses and then got into being a nurse practitioner, we had one nutrition course as a prerequisite to get into grad school. That was it. And I think that maybe we talked about nutrition again for, I don't know, a couple hours, was interspersed in here and there. But I knew the vast majority of what I knew about nutrition and exercise from my own personal experience that I had before I went into school. And so a lot of us, what we didn't learn, what I learned after this, which was so fascinating to me, is that the vast majority of studies that have been done on nutrition and on weight and on weight loss are actually sponsored by food and nutrition companies and exercise companies. They are sponsored by people who have skin in the game for the results turning out in a certain way. And when I really started learning about how much genetic involvement was in how your body digested food, the effect that trauma has on inflammation levels and on food digestion, right? How so many women have gut issues, have issues digesting food. And when we get down to it, they actually have trauma around food, and they have trauma around their body image. And a lot of times they have trauma around how their body was used by somebody else or objectified by somebody else. That was a huge eye-opening moment to go, wow, I think that everything I've learned about food and how it works for my body was wrong. About 90% of what I've learned is wrong. And so I want to just share that with you, because if you're somebody who hasn't studied nutrition a lot, or you haven't studied these things and you've been told these messages around, calories in equals calories out. Nope. Like, in order to maintain your weight, however many calories you eat is however many calories you need to expend. If you want to lose weight, you need to expend more calories than you are eating. Nope, not how it works. Not how it works at all. Because if the body is in a starvation mode, if we have literally created an internal scarcity landscape, our body is in survival mode. And it's going, anything this woman eats, I'm going to save. Anything this human eats, I'm going to save. And by the way, we have a lot of trauma in our past. And so we are consistently energetically and emotionally activated. And so the way that my body digests food when I am in a trauma response, when I am triggered, when I am activated, is entirely different than when I live in a calm, relaxed body. Also, the amount of food that I eat and the type of food that I eat doesn't immediately directly correlate to what happens in my body. Right? Not necessarily. So there's a lot of messaging that we've received around food and how it attaches to our bodies. And we're going to talk more about body image next week. And I just think it's really important to call that out here, because that's connected to scarcity. We've been taught that we need to restrict ourselves. We've been taught that we need to be quote unquote good with food, that if we fall off track or fall off the wagon with a diet, that we need to get back up and get back on. Invitation to recognize, to start thinking about the fact that there is no track and there is no wagon. That those are shame-based ideas, right? Because if you get off track, you're separated from everyone else. You're separated from where you're supposed to be. That's shame. You fall off the wagon, everyone else is moving forward and you're stuck behind. That's shame. That's shame. So then we look at our food's connection to boundaries, right? And this is also when we think about with parents, right? We want our kids to learn how to set healthy boundaries for themselves. And boundaries are things that we put in place to make sure that our needs are met. And so often we had boundaries modeled for us around food that didn't meet our needs. So we had boundaries modeled around food where we watched our mom or our dad or our other caregiver cut up a really small chicken breast and eat a small plate of broccoli and tell herself she was full, and then watch her then every night go into the kitchen and get more. And so the boundary is that, okay, we're going to restrict ourselves. Okay, but wait, no, we're not. Okay, but then wait, we are, but then we're not, right? Imagine as a child watching that. That's very confusing. Some of the boundaries that we had set, right, are the need is for you to eat everything I put in front of you. The need is for you to clear your plate, because clearing your plate makes you a good girl. And if you clear your plate, you get a treat. Does that make sense? Does that help us moving forward when we get older? To not be able to listen to our body's cues when it says we are hungry or we aren't? If there's one thing the pandemic has done that's really beautiful for our family is we used to all sit down at the same time and we used to all eat at the same time. And if you weren't hungry, you ate anyway. And what I've really learned is like, wow, that's kind of weird because like, I don't want to eat at the same times every day. That doesn't feel good for me. I don't want to be forced to eat when I'm not hungry. And so with our kids, we make dinner. And if you're hungry, you eat it. And if you're not hungry, you don't. And everyone's allowed to have a treat. The only thing you got to do is just try a bite of everything, because sometimes you don't realize how hungry you are. So my kids love popsicles. My kids love ice cream bars. Great. You can absolutely have one of those. Try a bite of chicken. Try a bite of the green beans. If you love it and you're like, ooh, I want more, great. Have your popsicle and come back and have more of the chicken and green beans. I will tell you that my kids actually finish their plates 90% of the time. And when I say finish their plates, eat to their body's desired fullness 90% of the time now, but half of the time the popsicle comes in between. They eat some of their food, they have the popsicle, later they come back an hour later and eat the rest of their food. And what a beautiful way for them to learn how to pay attention to their bodies. And to also not have shame around the food. Right? And it's modeled a lot for me too, to even ask at dinner time, am I hungry? Do I want to eat this yet? Right? Or determining that if we say around boundaries, you have to have, I'm trying to create a healthy meal for my family. So I have to have a veggie, a fruit, a starch, and a protein. And I have to eat all of that. Well, I don't know about you, but have you ever watched a 2-year-old eat or a 3-year-old eat? They'll have like 6 servings of fruit one day, and then like 4 servings of protein that night, and then like 3 servings of carbs the next time. And they're so intuitive with what their body needs at every moment, right? I know I experienced this when I was pregnant. When I was pregnant, and again, there was a lot of body image and food stuff, trauma and shame coming up around that, but I would crave things. Like, if I don't get this, I will die, right? I will hurt somebody to get this food. And the things I craved were ice cream, milkshakes, oranges. With my twins, when my iron levels were low, I craved red meat, like rare, medium topped cooked red meat, burgers, steaks, all those things. My body was telling me this is what I need. And by the way, if you're somebody who's living, right now we're living in this pandemic, if your body is sending you messages that it wants carbs and it wants sugar, that makes sense because you are in a stressful situation right now. And in stressful situations, our body goes, we need quick, digestible energy. And carbs are great, quick, digestible energy. So if you're somebody that's like, I can't understand why I keep craving the Pepsi, or I keep craving the ice cream, or I keep craving this, it's because your body is in a stress response. And it is trying to do what it knows best, which is to support you and survive by getting the nutrition that will be easiest for it to use. And isn't that such a, so much better way to look at that when you start craving sugar or you start craving carbs? that you're not a bad human, that carbs aren't bad, that sugar's not bad, that my body is in an acute stress response? Right? So boundaries around making sure your needs are met. Am I actually allowed to listen? Was I taught that I was allowed to listen to my body and intuitively give it what it's asking for, and that I can trust that I can eat when it says I'm hungry and I cannot eat when it says I'm not? That if there's something I want to eat for pleasure, I'm allowed to have that even if I'm not very hungry? What boundaries have I set up for myself based on the ones that I was taught? And then we've got love. Love's a fun one, right? Love and connection. Did you love those starving kids in Africa that you were told that if you didn't finish your plate, that they were going to get hurt? Anybody else? There's kids in Africa that are starving right now. You should be grateful for that food. Well, I don't want to hurt anybody. I want to be connected to people. I want to feel like I'm a good human. I want to feel like I get love for being a nice person. So of course I'm going to finish my plate if I feel like this is hurting people. Right? Never mind the fact that like it has literally nothing, one has nothing to do with the other. Right? Or if you get praise and attention from your parents when you eat less, or when you do a good job controlling your appetite. I know there's a lot of humans listening to this that may have had that experience. Wow, you did such a good job eating less today. You did such a good job controlling yourself. Or where you looked at the menu and ordered what you thought would make the other person happy instead of what would make you happy because you knew they were going to judge your choice. Right? Trying to fit in, trying to feel love and acceptance and connection. There's a lot of shame built into that. Or ordering the salad at dinner when you go out on the date because you don't want that person to think that you are gluttonous or that you eat too much. Because you want them to like you. Right? What did your caregivers teach you about how you received love in your food interactions? Maybe your dad or your caregiver or your mom was a chef and they cooked really, really amazing things and you loved eating them. And you felt so connected when you would get to bake with them or you would get to cook with them until that one day where somebody said, maybe you should stop eating everything that your parents make because you're putting on a couple pounds. And all of a sudden you stopped doing that thing that deeply connected you to your caregiver or to somebody that you loved because you experienced shame. You don't bake anymore. You don't bake or cook because you don't quote unquote trust yourself around the product that you make and how much you eat. Right? Are you allowed to love yourself? If you overeat, if you eat until your stomach is really full, are you allowed to do that? Are you allowed to love yourself if you restrict? On the other side of this, right? The body positive movement, love yourself no matter what. Well, that's kind of a shameful thing to say. If you don't love yourself no matter what, you should experience shame. No. I'm allowed to not love myself. I'm allowed to accept myself. I'm allowed to accept how I feel about my body and accept how I feel about my relationship with food. I don't have to love it. I just have to accept it and give myself some compassion around how I've shown up based on the trauma that I've gone through, based on the shame that I've experienced. Right? And then we have the self-image piece, which we've kind of dabbled in this entire time, right? What does it mean about me and how others perceive me when I interact in certain ways with food? I remember the amount of preoccupation I had with food just a few years ago. I would wake up and I would probably count the amount of calories that I ate probably 10 to 12 times in a day. I never wrote them down because that felt too disordered, but I counted them over and over and over and over and over. And if I knew I was going out on a date with my husband in the evening, or I was going to a girls' dinner where I was going to eat a lot or have a rich meal, I would starve myself. I would restrict myself for the entire day and give myself as little calories as possible to then allow for those calories later, because I was only allowed to have 2,000 calories a day. And what was so fascinating is I was so disconnected to what my body wanted and what my body needed that I couldn't even tell when I finally stepped off of that hamster wheel and was like, we're not counting calories. We're going to start listening to our body. We're going to start being intuitive with it. We're going to start giving it what it needs. We're going to actively not diet. The amount of shame and the amount of distraction that I noticed was happening around that was massive. My identity was tied up so much in what I weighed and what I ate. So much. And when I was like, okay, I'm not doing this anymore, and I'm going to hire help, and I'm going to hire support around this so that I can not do this anymore, and I can start moving my body in the ways that feel good and fueling my body in the ways that feel good, and really like clearing out that mental real estate. Like there was so much there. And so much of it was tied to my identity, right? The first place I looked in the mirror was not in my own eyes, it was at my stomach. The first thing I did when I looked at food was turn the container over and look at a serving and look at how many calories were in it and how many carbs were in it. When I worked out, I wanted to know how many calories I burned. Instead of being like, did I adequately tire out my body? Did I adequately move my body in a way that feels good and not too far, right? The amount of that my self-image was tied to food was massive. And so I just remember being so preoccupied when we go to family dinners. And I would just be like, oh my gosh, what food is there? And I would always end up, quote unquote, overeating because I was spending so much time and so much willpower saying, nope, we're not going to have that. Nope, we're not going to have that. But by the end, I just exhausted my willpower out. And then it was like, forget it. Let's just do it. And then there was a shame cycle. Oh, look, I did it again. Okay, well, now I need to restrict myself further. Now I need to put more rules on top. Now I need to be even more vigilant. And what I want you to hear is that shame-based cycle starts restricting and restricting and restricting until you have no room to move. You have no room to breathe. You have no room to think about other things. And so what's really fascinating to me now is that a couple of months ago, I actually had a family member say, I'm kind of concerned about your weight. You know, you've gained a lot. And what was so fascinating was I had a definite trauma response to that. I had a huge shame-based response to that. And then afterwards, I was like, wait a second, this is the healthiest I have ever been. Every other week, I am going into my therapist's office and reprocessing the trauma and the shameful experiences that I had in my childhood and in my adolescence. Every 3 times a week, I am showing up to the gym with a trainer who is helping me stop counting calories, who's helping me relearn my appetite, helping my body come back online and send my brain messages, because that disconnect happened at age 9. I am working with a nutritionist who's really helping me make sure that I'm fueling my body in a way that feels good. My trainer and the nutrition person were the same human, right? We're focusing on how much protein I'm getting. We're focusing on how much water I'm drinking. I'm drinking less alcohol than I ever have like since I turned, well, we'll say 21 to keep this kosher, but let's be honest, it was before that. And I'm realizing I just said kosher there, and I don't want to say kosher there to keep this on the up and up. I was like, wait, I'm actually the healthiest I've ever been. Yes. Am I in the biggest pant size I've ever been in? Yep. But am I the healthiest I've ever been? Yep. Holistically? Absolutely. My digestion, my energy levels, the amount of caffeine that I'm drinking, all of these places, this is the healthiest I've ever been. So am I going to trade that to make other people feel better about how much caloric intake I'm taking into my body? No. No, sir. So I just also like the last thing I want to talk about is the amount of internal shame we can feel around food because it can become a self-perpetuating cycle, like I just said. So I had a binge restrict cycle where I would restrict, and then my willpower would invariably wear out, run out, and then I would binge. And I didn't have an eating disorder, and I had disordered eating. Because I had all of this unprocessed trauma that was hanging out in my body and causing a lot of anxiety, and food made that feel better. It felt good to have a full stomach and to cause myself that little bit of discomfort because I knew where the discomfort was coming from. It felt good to restrict my caloric intake to the point that my stomach would feel gnawing or empty because I knew why I was experiencing that pain, as opposed to the other pain and anxiety that was living in my body that I had no idea where it was coming from or what it belonged to. When I have clients or patients or come across humans that I'm in conversation with who talk to me about their struggles with food, it's never about the food. I haven't had one case where it's actually about the food. What I have had is hundreds, maybe even thousands of instances where it's about control, or it's about self-soothing, numbing, or it's about self-protection, aka self-sabotage. So when it's about control, right? If I have felt shamed for a very long time, and the one place that I can control that is overeating so that this bothers somebody else, so that I can wear that visible evidence, that weight, or eat that physical evidence in front of them as two middle fingers up in the air of like, I don't actually care that you're trying to shame me. We do care that they're trying to shame us. We're rebelling back against it instead of creating a healthy, aligned response to it. And that's a defense mechanism. If it's about self-soothing, food makes us feel good. Food gives us, food can give us endorphins, depending on if it's connected to an exciting experience, right? Food can, it increases our level of certain neurotransmitters, feel-good hormones in our body. It can provide us connection and love. It can, from a sensual standpoint, give us pleasure. It is a way to soothe. And if I'm feeling very, very uncomfortable, it can be a way to numb that discomfort. And we can use it as self-protection, or what other people call self-sabotage. I call self-sabotage self-protection. We can use it as self-protection because maybe food is the only thing that makes you feel safe. Maybe you're overeating because then, like I just said, you don't have to feel the pain that's in your body that is that's nebulous, and you can't attach to anything because you don't know what's going on. And instead you can feel a very specific type of pain that this is a control piece too, that feels like you are like, okay, I know what this is. And so the bad actually feels good because it has meaning to it versus the bad that you're experiencing that has no meaning and you don't know where it's coming from. So that is what I have on this heavy topic, hard thing to talk about. Have had to regulate myself through this. So if you've had to regulate yourself through this too, just simply witnessing you in that, I want to give you, those of you on the live, opportunity to ask any questions that you have. I'm seeing some resonance around being told that you constantly have to love yourself when you're noticing improvements you desire to make makes you actually feel less supported in wanting to change. Absolutely. I don't need any of my clients to love themselves. I just need my clients to be honest with themselves, to be accepting of saying, this is how it is. This is what's happening. Because creating a grounded sense of reality and like, this isn't bad or this isn't good, this just is, that's a really beautiful place to start from. We don't have to jump to self-love. Not usually helpful. Some resonance around always ending up eating more than feels good, right? At family gatherings because you're stressed out about it all. Absolutely. There's a good self-protection and self-sabotage. I'm just going to stay over here by the chip and dip bowl and ignore the fact that grandma and my aunt are fighting or are saying inflammatory things or are being whatever, right? This feels good over here, so I'm going to chill over here and distract myself from avoiding that thing. Question of, what do you think about eating the same thing routinely? I've heard that can be a good way to change your relationship with food. Just curious on your take. I do this often. I'm somebody who gets like really into a food. Again, I think this is just my body being intuitive about things. I'll get really into a food. I'll eat it for like 3 months straight, 3 weeks straight. It's my dinner or my lunch 5 times a week. And then I'm like, I don't really want that anymore. And then I switch to something else, right? Right now I'm on the Amy's cheese enchiladas. Like I'll have those 3 or 4 times a week with some sour cream. There's some good carbs, some good protein, some good fat, right? So eating the same thing routinely, if you're doing it from a place of, this is helping me not think about food, this is helping me heal my relationship with food, where I'm just going to like feel comfortable eating the same thing and take away my need to think about it for a while, I can definitely get behind that. I can definitely get behind some self-coping strategies to start where you start clearing up mental real estate around food. And if it's happening from a restrictive place of like, I know these things are healthy, so I'm going to just eat these every single time, that's different. So I think you get to ask yourself, is this ritual or routine that I'm putting into place, is it expansive? Does it improve my relationship with my body? Does it improve my relationship with food? Does it allow me to make more choices? Does it allow me to have more of my mental capacity back? Does it give me more energy? Does it make things easier? Or is it restrictive? Is it so I don't have to think about it, because when I think about it, I get really upset. And so it's actually a way for me to avoid dealing with the thing. Or is it this way I know I'm getting my nutrients and I can't eat anything bad, right? That's where you get to ask yourself the question. Marcy, what's the best way to heal after we've been through a challenging time that was actually threatening to us? Whew, big question. Love that question. Here's what I'll say is that really, I'm going to gather my thoughts. Number one, I think validation that the thing actually happened, right? I think a lot of times when we go through something that was actually threatening, that was traumatic, that threatened our psychological or our physical safety, we don't fully validate the experience. We don't find the edges and the boundaries of like, okay, this is the entire thing that I went through. A lot of times we'll be like, okay, yeah, like there's this little piece, but I'm not going to acknowledge the rest of it. But really like giving yourself time to be like, oh, shoot. And like this was connected to that. And this was connected to that. And this was connected to that. And wow, this actually really affected a lot. I think that validation is really big. The validation is really big. Talking to somebody else about it that you trust, that you know is not going to shame you, and have them be like, that was messed up. Or like, wow, I'm really sorry you were put through that. I think making it real is a great first step, because it's hard to address something that we haven't fully made real. That a part of us is still telling ourselves like, yeah, but like maybe it didn't actually happen like that, or maybe it wasn't that bad, or maybe it was this, or maybe it was that, where you're like gaslighting yourself. That ability to really be like, no, that this happened, even if it's just to yourself, right, is huge. And I think from there, then you get to, whether it's on your own using trauma-informed resources like podcasts, like my podcast, or like self-directed courses, or going through the TRIPS certification program, or working with a coach one-on-one, or finding a trauma-informed therapist that's actually very, very well-versed in trauma. Because there's lots of therapists out there that are not well-versed in trauma, believe it or not. Getting support, getting into community with other people who are going to hold space for you while you heal, who are going to continue to validate you, who are going to help you see things in a different way, resources that are going to help you reframe things and process through what's happened and create safety and stability for yourself and your nervous system. That's going to be huge. That's really huge. Traumas, Teal Swan says this. I don't know if any of you follow Teal Swan. She's a little woo-woo, but I absolutely love her. She says that we can't heal relational traumas in solitude. We can't heal relational traumas in solitude. So if someone else was part of that trauma, you don't have to heal it with that person, but you are going to need to be in connection and relationship with other humans to heal that, because it was a trauma that involved connection. And so it can't be healed in solitude. It's going to require you to reconnect with somebody else that says, I see you, I hear you, I witness you, I do not shame you, I will not traumatize you. I am a safe person for you to be connected with. You are safe here. Kaylee, one challenge I have is around free food or food I paid for at a restaurant. I think my behaviors are more linked to money than food sometimes. Oh my goodness. Thank you for like making this connection at the end of this. This is so big, right? Getting your money's worth. What were you taught about money and food? What were you taught about food you paid for? Do you eat extra food because it's going to go bad in your fridge, or because you feel guilty because you grew up with never enough food, and now that you have more than enough, it really hurts you to see food go to waste? That feels dangerous. That feels wrong. That feels shameful. Such a good noticing. Where is the shame around me eating food at a restaurant, or not eating food at a restaurant, or not eating free food? Is it the fact that this means that I'm wasteful? And where was I shamed around being wasteful? What was the lesson that I learned about people who waste food? Or about people who waste money? What did I learn about that? Because if I learned that people who waste food or people who waste money are X, Y, and Z, and that is a shameful way to be, then you best bet that I'm not going to do that, because that I don't want to be aligned with that identity. Thank you all for your participation in this. Greatly appreciate it. I feel like this has been a really, really great hopefully transformational, hopefully eye-opening, explorative, reframing experience for you listening to this. If you have friends or other humans in your life that you know struggle with disordered eating, or you know have shame around food, or shame around waste, or shame around restriction, or shame around being too much when it comes to food and body image, please invite them in here with their consent. Please share this with them. If you're listening to this on the podcast, please forward this episode to them. Because I really believe it is part of my mission on this planet is to really start helping ourselves release the shame around ideas and behaviors that we adopted before we even knew we were doing it, that are still continuing to run our lives. That's a huge thing. That's a huge goal of mine. And so if we can help just one extra person, that means everything to me. So thank you for that in advance. I will see you next week for body image and shame. And I love you all. And I hope you have a fabulous rest of your week.